Hey, good morning or good afternoon or good evening to you guys. We're going to get started here in just a moment. We're going to give just another minute or so for the last minute folks to be able to join us. So we'll be starting here in just a moment. All righty. Looks like we're getting enough folks to join us in there. So we'll go ahead and kick it off. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you guys, depending on where it is that you're dialing in from. And welcome to our webinar on cracking the code, how to effectively secure session tokens in the browser. Um, Good day to you all. My name is Don Meyer. I'm part of the product marketing organization here at Seraphic, and it is my pleasure to be your host today for this incredible journey that we're about to embark on. And trust me, it is not for the weak of heart. There's a lot of interesting things that we're going to be uncovering here, and more importantly, the significance of how to really look at browser security from a fundamentally different way, and what Seraphic Security has been doing, kind of where we're different and why it's unique and valuable to you. We're going to dive into a lot of that as well. We've got a whole agenda here. We're going to be covering all that. We'll also have Q&A at the end. So for housekeeping purposes, this session is being recorded. You will have access to the recording once we're done with it. And this is going to be as interactive as we can possibly make it, given the format. But if you have questions throughout the presentation, questions at all, please go ahead and use the Q&A tool that's at part of the WebEx browser tool here as well. We have a formal Q&A session at the end where we'll be able to answer all of those questions and then some, and we can have a further dialogue as well. I'm very, very pleased to be joined today by my colleague, brother in arms, if you will, Jeremy Sanders, who is our lead SE and has been with us now for, oh gosh, how long have you been with us now? About a year or so?
Well, about 2.5 years now,
Two and
actually.
a half years. But time flies, man. It just feels like it was
It's
just
enough.
yesterday. We're just getting together on stuff. And Jeremy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jeremy Sanders. I'm Director of Sales Engineering here at Seraphic Security. I cover most of North America for sales engineering.
Fantastic. And so it's going to be the Don and Jeremy show today. We're going to go through the presentation here, and without further ado, let's go ahead and kick it off. So today we've got quite a few things that we're going to be talking about. We're going to start off with why the browser is today's most popular attack surface, and really kind of dive into what we've been seeing, not only from an industry perspective, but what we're also seeing from our customer perspectives as well. Give you some real good tangibles in terms of how threat actors are now starting to change some of their tactics and what are some of the things that they're now starting to target. We'll also bring up some examples of some successful attacks and exploits to really drive that point home and share why it's important now to really start thinking differently about the browser and why browser security should be part of the conversation now as we start going forward. Then we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about doing browser security right. What is Seraphic's approach? How have we been kind of pioneering a unique approach to helping to solve for a lot of the key challenges, not only that we're going to uncover here, but additional challenges as well that we'll have an opportunity to talk about. And then finally, we'll open it up for Q&A. So a lot to uncover, a lot to unpack here. So let's go ahead and just start diving right in and really start to kind of showcase and illustrate why today browsers are really dominating the enterprise. One of the more interesting things that happened, especially over the last 5 years, was that we all went home due to the COVID pandemic. And having worked through all that, we really had a great opportunity to reshuffle and to rejigger and to just kind of rethink, how do we service and connect our employees, and how do we do that in an effective way to keep them focused on productivity, keep them focused on the things that they need to do to keep driving the right outcomes. The cloud was instrumental in that. We could not have done what we did without cloud and without developing new ways of conducting business through cloud applications. A lot of the investment in cloud has sparked all that digital transformation stuff that we've been talking about over the last couple of years as well, and really starting to transform how interconnected and how we can communicate, share information, consume information, that sort of thing. At the heart of all that transformation, what's really kind of driving all of that, interestingly enough, is the browser. And in fact, depending on who you talk to, more and more organizations are stating that the vast majority of what it is that we do today from a business perspective is conducted right on the browser. A case in point, here we all are on this webinar, and it's running through our browsers. We're able to share not only the slides, you can hear our audio, you can see our faces in the video and that sort of thing. And it's all being run through this wonderful tool called the browser. Now, the browser has been kind of part of the enterprise landscape as part of the operating system and just another application, that sort of thing. And when everything was closed off in the four walls of the organization, we had some pretty decent controls on it. Fast forward to 2020, everyone left the office, and we're now this kind of hybrid environment where we're in and out of offices, in and out of airports, in and out of hotels, in and out of home offices and partner communities. There is no concept or construct around what an office is and what work really is. Work is whatever you do wherever you're doing it. And the way to facilitate that, again, is the browser. So the browser is paramount in terms of driving the right types of productivity, the right types of outcomes. And it hasn't gone unnoticed, though, by our adversaries. Standard browsers and existing solutions really aren't designed for and never worth in scope of kind of that enterprise grade security capability or that enterprise grade stack that we enjoy so much in our premises environments, in our cloud environments, on our endpoints, but they're not extended historically or traditionally at all down to the browser level. And that's been interesting. So as attackers have been, busily trying to hack into infrastructure, hack into our cloud environments, hack into our physical environments, hack into our endpoints, they're noticing that it's getting a little bit harder to do so because we've been so diligent at locking these areas out. An interesting bastion of kind of maybe ignored relevance has been the browser. And we're seeing adversaries really starting to change tactics and focus on that. And that's been happening, quite a bit with regards to things like phishing, and phishing attacks have been quite prevalent, especially over the pandemic. But the tactics that they're using now and how they're duping users into landing on different sites or giving up different things is changing dramatically. And some of the things that they're pulling from the sessions, that's also changing too, not just usernames and passwords, but session tokens and things of that nature, which has been really, really bizarre. And Jeremy, I know you've been spending a lot of time talking with customers and trying to get a gauge on what's been going on from the customer perspective. How has kind of the browser emerged as kind of this main productivity tool, and what are our customers really starting to do with it?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, right, after the pandemic, right, people saw an opportunity to shift a lot of their infrastructure to the cloud so that it's broadly accessible, right? And we have the OS on lockdown, a lot of tools, all your EDRs, things like that. You have your SASEs and firewalls on the network side, and that's left the browser as a soft underability, and it's becoming more and more important over the up before 2020, but 2020 the importance of it really took off. A lot of it was driven from remote access, right? If I don't have a corporate laptop, but I can still access those applications. So now I'm running from an operating system without a stack, right? But I just need to limit their access to the applications, right? So we're pushing the controls into the browser, or the importance of the controls into the browser, and there just quite frankly hasn't been a market that's been able to address that. It started changing around 2020, and the bad guys have shifted their techniques dramatically to go after that soft underbelly inside there, right? So they're, I like to say the rats follow the cheese, right? It's harder to get in to the operating system now. And if I do, what's there? Right. Previous years it was I had 20 applications and most of them ran on my operating system. Well, now I have 40 applications and they're all run from inside my browser. Right. So if I can get inside there, I can steal data, right? And username and passwords, I can fish for those. But if I have MFA, that can help secure that method. But now, as we're seeing, and as we're going to talk about today, if I get a session token, it doesn't matter. That's already gotten by the MFA challenge, right? So we're kind of it's becoming easy and easier because the bad guys are getting smarter and smarter, right? So it takes a tool that operates with the context of what happens inside the browser to be able to do anything about it.
Absolutely. And that old proverb still rings true today, may you live in interesting times. That's a curse. And boy, I can't imagine more interesting times than we're facing right now as every gap we've been able to kind of plug on the infrastructure side, the endpoint side, to your point, hardening all these different environments. Here's this last bastion of kind of unbridled attention that's just getting all of the lion's share because work has shifted right to it. And as a result, our adversaries are shifting to it as well. And when you really peel back that onion and start looking at the different layers, it is rather alarming to see all the different methods and or ways that the browser can be compromised, where there is gaps in existing solutions and or existing coverage that really don't extend down to the browser itself, leaving the browser wide open for not only just user identity theft, but even we're talking about endpoint compromise. And the browser is that point where the malware is delivered before it ends up on the endpoint. And if you can be in there and take a look and understand what's going on and be at that level of interaction, well, all of a sudden now we can start closing some of those gaps. But even in addition to that, we've got acceptable use policies and all sorts of other things where there are no governance now within this interesting kind of application called the browser. And Jeremy, again, from a customer perspective, are they seeing these same things, and kind of where are their concerns really aligned to as it pertains to some of these different gaps?
Yeah, it's been interesting as we're bringing this type of solution to the market. Kind of see things divvied up into the people that are aware these style attacks are able to get by their SASEs. They malicious code execution inside a browser. My EDR can't see that, right? It's an execution engine that they have no visibility into. Other people that are aware of that, and then the people that didn't fully understand it until they see a demo, right? And the light bulb goes off, and they're like, "Oh my gosh!" I've actually talked to two different CISOs just this week, and we're only halfway through the week, or not even that have told me that their biggest fear is session hijacking and token theft, right? And that's we haven't even talked about governance. That's usually sometimes that's CISO, sometimes that's a separate director, right? It's comes from another division inside the company too, and this can kind of bring both of those risks down, right? Both dramatically on the security side, and then because we're operating inside the browsing session and not just from the extension APIs, right? We can start using context for what the end user is doing and what they should be allowed and not allowed to do, right? And then applying those type of controls inside of the browser. Again, from a perspective that they haven't had before. It's not a simple yes or no, block or allow, right? We can put guardrails up, right? And say you're allowed to see data, but not this type of data, right? You're allowed to access this web page, but only interact with it in a specific way, right? So this type of controls is not something that people have had exposure to before. So they're both people excited and see the gap and address it, and then the people that are just now becoming aware of it too, right? It's
And
been an
you made an
interesting thing.
interesting Yeah, and you made a really interesting point as well, is that, there are a lot of solutions out there that are helping to mitigate a lot of the risks associated with, malware and phishing and different exploits and that sort of thing. But when you look at where the execution of a lot of this stuff is going to take place, it is taking place more frequently now in the browser, where there is no level of that type of policy driven control available to infuse any type of action. So if you think about the browser is kind of where the crime is taking place. Outside of that, you have a SASE solution or some other type of cloud delivered solution. Outside of the browser, you have the OS and the kernel. Again, those are outside of the quote unquote crime scene. And usually by the time something has happened in the browser, it's kind of too late. The bad stuff is happening, and users are our adversaries are siphoning off interesting data from our users, and we're seeing this over and over and over again. And I know, Jeremy, This is something that you're super passionate about. You definitely got your finger on the pulse of. I mean, these are just some current headlines of what's been going on, but talking to different customers, what are they facing? What's really going on out there in the wild?
Yeah, the ones that we see the most, we see adversary in the middle attacks, right? The evil jinx, evil proxy, that type of attack. That's stealing sessions, right? There's interesting use cases there, or attack methods, I should say, right? The bad guys are effectively phishing first, right? And then when an end user clicks on a link, they think they're interacting with the web page, and they are, but it's not even their browser. They're actually interacting with the attacker's browser on that adversary in the middle, right? And then they enter in their username and password. They get their MFA, and now the bad guy can kill that second half of the link. He doesn't need you anymore after you've clicked on that MFA, right? Every control you have in the world is now no longer in play, right? It's just the bad guy with an authenticated session token going into the server, right? That's a nasty one. The one that was really crazy to me was the Okta hack. I mean, man, that one, it was brutal. The bad guys found their way into Okta's Zendesk ticketing system. And in there, as part of the support requests, the end users uploaded a HAR file, which contains session tokens in some cases. And so they took the authenticated session tokens out of there and just replayed them against the end user servers offline, right? Completely out of band. They weren't still in Okta's network when they did it. But how do you catch that? All you're seeing in your SIM logs is an authenticated session token was presented to your web server, and the session was allowed. Right?
Right.
How do I know that that's a bad guy? Right? You have very complicated ways. There are ways to go around that, right? Including gathering endpoint logs and trying to associate them with active sessions and seeing if I only have one side of that, then I can assume that there's an anomaly. And very complicated, hard to solve data problem, right? And being able to provide context and security controls both for phishing, for exploitation, and for session token encryption, just kind of take away a lot of the avenues that we see the bad guys using. Right?
And if they can hijack your session tokens, I mean, they're masquerading as a legitimately authenticated user. There's no controls, no policy, no any type of like firewalling because session's already been authenticated. I don't go back and recheck that again, especially if the session duration is still within that parameter and the user's behavior is doing what the user normally would do and blah 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 blah. There's very little checks and balances once a user has been authenticated and those tokens are then cached down into the browser. So it is really kind of an interesting way. And to your point, it requires a ton of manual, not only understanding, but manual investigation to be able to figure out, was this legit or was it not? So it's very, very hard to kind of determine what's going on within the environment if these things are open and exposed and being hijacked. So yeah, it's really interesting what's been going on and where we're seeing the adversaries spending a lot of their time and a lot of their attention on. Fortunately, there is some light at the end of this proverbial bad tunnel, but it begs to really dive in a little bit deeper. What is it specifically that they're going after, and why are they going after these things? We're seeing again new tactics to exploit the storage areas within browsers because tokens have a longer shelf life. Right. Once you're authenticated, that authentication token, it's alive for the duration of that session. And if I can grab that and I can masquerade as you, I can keep that session open as long as I want to be able to get into whatever this application is or whatever you're trying to do some reconnaissance, maybe download some malware, and off we go. So these things are super, super valuable, but why are they so available to hackers, I guess, Jeremy, is my question to you. And how and why does MFA not really come into play here? How it's supposed to be that extra layer, and we always talk about defense in depth, and MFA is being part of that. How come MFA is not really coming into play here, and why are these types of attacks able to bypass that sort of thing?
Yeah, the authenticated session token gets presented to the client side device after the MFA, right? So they do still have to do MFA. Again, it's MFA is a good way to stop if the bad guys get your credentials, right?
Username and
Because then they
passwords.
can't
Yep.
just use your credentials. Now there are other avenues there. You can, MFA bomb people, just continue until they finally get annoyed and click allow. Hopefully people don't do that, but it does prove out they do. There's other ways that they can reach in and grab those tokens. Again, I bypass all of that. I bypass the need for credentials. I bypass the need for MFA if I can just get that token, right?
Yep.
And the ways that they're getting that is growing as well, right? They can come from the operating system if they can find a foothold in there, whether through a piece of malware or tricking you to run OC with like the Lumistealer style attacks. They'll trick you into pasting a PowerShell command that then calls out and pulls down bad information, then or bad malware, and then they can use a CVE in a browser to reach in
Yep.
and grab that information. Or they could get you to land on a web page that runs a malicious script that reaches in there and then acts like it's a server to grab those session tokens. Or it can do things like get you to install a malicious extension, right? It looks like it's a benign extension, right? But then it can reach inside the browser and pull authenticated session tokens out of there, right? So the browser does have, most browsers have really good controls around how they're storing that information. But if an extension can operate inside the browser's framework, then they can legitimately request that, even though they're spoofing the information, right? They can still, gain access into those encrypted databases and be able to pull the session token out that way, right? So it was up to us to try to find a way to be novel about how that it's encrypted and how it's stored inside there, right?
Right, right, exactly. And as we're seeing these changes in tactics and as we're seeing these kind of new emerging opportunities that are being exploited, we've been spending some time just really kind of figuring a way to crack that code. And I think, what we have done is rather elegant, but super strategic in terms of how do you get the upper hand now? How do we start, realistically taking the advantage away from our adversaries and really start putting in place the necessary mechanisms, structures, filters, whatever you want to call it, to really start driving the right types of security outcomes. That's really what Seraphic Security has been about as it pertains to the browser security. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just kind of talking about what we've been doing, who we are, and where we're about. Hopefully, you guys have heard of us. Seraphic, we've been around for a couple of years now, and we really are redefining browser security and bringing enterprise grade controls, enterprise grade security, policy driven security down to a very intimate level within the browser and doing it in a very unique way that allows us to be able to do things like protect the session tokens and protect the data that now is being stored and being exfiltrated from the browser from our adversaries. We do that through a really cool patented technology that is an agent that runs as an abstraction layer above the JavaScript. And we'll kind of show you what that means in just a second. But because we're so intimate with JavaScript, because we can do things like ride within the JavaScript, we're seeing that point where a user's interacting with the DOM and with the tables and with the different forms and fields and what they're doing with it. We have that level of visibility. And more importantly, we can infuse control down there. We can look at the structure of the page. We can look at all the different elements and components of the page as it's being delivered to the browser and make determinations about it. We can look at, URLs and make determinations. Hey, is this a known bad site? Is this an unknown bad site? Should we take a look, further investigation before we allow this user to be able to interact with any of the stuff on this website? Because we have that level of visibility, we can actually do some really cool things like provide sufficient 0-day and end-day exploit prevention right in the browser itself. We can do things like protect against advanced malware threats, advanced phishing techniques, session hijacking, and things of that nature. With that level of visibility comes also the opportunity now to extend that kind of policy driven controls around data and data governance. Now in the browser itself, I can start to look at what are the fields that my users are interacting with and what's the data sets that they're trying to either pull down or upload into these different fields. Does that conform to policy? If not, I'm right there at the point where the user's trying to input that data in, and I can infuse some policy controls there. And more importantly, I can let the user know what's going on. Hey, you're in violation. This is in violation of our governance policies. Here's what you need to do, or here's why it was flagged, blah, blah, blah. I can now start to inform the users and educate the users on best practices or acceptable use policies and things of that nature as it pertains not only to the threat side, but now as it pertains to the data side. And what's great about that is because we're so intimate with the browser itself, it doesn't matter whether we're sitting on a managed device, whether we're sitting on a BYOD device or a third-party device, it's the same consistent set of controls. We infuse this agent into any existing browser, or if you have a BYOD environment, you can get a Seraphic infused browser of your choice, whether you like Chrome or Edge or Firefox or Safari, whatever it is. We'll wrap that browser in our or with our agent, and you get that same level of consistent visibility and control anywhere your user community is, anywhere that they work on any device that they are using within that environment. It delivers a consistent outcome that's virtually invisible to the user. And Jeremy, you've had a lot of experience talking with customers, and I've been talking with some of the customers as well, getting up to speed. The one thing that the customers say resoundingly is that, my God, my user community didn't even know it was there. And it's working in the background. It is invisible to the user, doesn't get in the way of their productivity. It doesn't get in the way of them having to change, any type of workflows or behaviors. It's the same browser they use with our agent installed in it, and it just works, and it works seamlessly. And, having had conversations, Jeremy, with a lot of our customers, how are they kind of interpreting kind of this formulaic approach that we've been using as it pertains to what they're struggling with in their environments? I know you mentioned before that a lot of the first time users start off with the security side of things, but we're starting to see more and more people start to get their feet wet, start to expand on those different use cases, and really start to bring in some of the other capabilities that we're able to do. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. There we kind of get things coming in two different ways. We have customers that want unmanaged style devices, so BYOD, contractors, BPOs, things like that. And they have limitations around what they can install there, right? And there is a side of enterprise browser security, other products out there that have the ability to do that part well. Unfortunately, they don't do well on managed devices, right? And then on the other side, we have ones that can also work in other browsers, but they don't do the unmanaged or BYOD side very well, right? So, what customers can end up doing is getting two solutions to handle the same problem, right? And that's another area where Seraphic excels very well at, is being able to address both of those use cases from the same pane of glass with the same policy sets. Now, you would typically deviate on the policies on what they're allowed to do, and base it all on the IDP integrations, things like that. But being able to offer both of those options with the same solution has definitely been a big boon for us when we're bringing this to the market, right? For
And
sure.
it's helping our customers as well, kind of modernize their infrastructure, right? Where a lot of the work is taking place in the browser to bring and extend kind of this level of security down to the browser means I don't have to support, a crazy VDI infrastructure anymore if I'm bringing some unmanaged devices in or bringing some from remote folks into the different applications they need. I might be able to, turn off some of the VPN stuff that I've been struggling with just because it's the only remote solution that seems to work well and gets you back to kind of the scrubbing centers of our policy controls. And we're seeing our customers really start to expand upon not only just looking at how do you provide the right type of security, but how do we provide the right type of connectivity. And one of the cool things that you were alluding to is that, irrespective of what device type, we connect, with the browser to our applications. And so Seraphic kind of sits in that connection schema and provides the right type of zero trust outcomes, if you will, all policy driven, all derived from context about the user, the device, the environment, that sort of thing, and can really start to help organizations get better control or better outcomes, if you will, in terms of their ZTNA or zero trust strategies as well. So those are some of the cool things that we're able to do. But more importantly, as we start talking about how we've infused some of this capability into the browser, you can start to see that we get a little bit more intimate, and it puts us in a very unique place. We have a tool that's kind of like, well, it's an extraction layer, as I said before. It's our agent. It works as a JSLR, JavaScript, a randomization agent, if you will, that sits as this abstraction layer right above the JavaScript engine, in between JavaScript's rendering of all the web stuff and the user's interaction with that stuff. And as I said, that's a very unique position for us to be able to infuse some types of controls. Now, as Jeremy had alluded to before, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach, providing some types of security controls for the browser. We see extensions a very lightweight, very user-friendly way of doing it, but it has limitations by design. It can only speak to the different APIs that are available to it and can only infuse so much visibility and control down into the browser itself, again, based on what those APIs are. Extensions can be noisy. Extensions can also be a handy route for exploit as well. And we've seen that time and time again. So it can be a little challenging to really round out, if you will, the proper controls, managed or unmanaged devices, when you're talking about extensions. Okay, you can replace the browsers, which is another, good alternative, but it delivers kind of a really challenging usability effort, if you will, for users, where they have to now relearn how to engage with the applications. And in some cases, depending on who the vendor is, the application could change and it could break the rendering of that application in the browser, which means I'm slowing down my users as well. And then I have to worry about the constant, uptake of the browser, what, new vulnerabilities are available in that Chromium-based system. It's my responsibility now to start bringing some of those things in, especially on the things that I've changed to that browser. And that may not be where my expertise lies in constantly pushing out updates and bug fixes and things of that nature. So there's pros and cons to each approach. And when we were coming to market, we thought about those and said, well, let's eliminate those trade-offs. Let's not have to force users to go in a direction that's going to create a lot of friction, or to go in a direction that's not going to be comprehensive enough and give us the right types of controls. So what we did was created this JSLR, this agent, this abstraction agent that we can infuse in any browser, whether it's an existing browser on your desktop, or as I said before, we're going to wrap it with a browser of your choice. I prefer to use Safari because I run on Mac OS. Perfect. We'll infuse Seraphic into a Safari version so that when you need to access your corporate applications, you have to go to that one and that one only, that browser only, to get access to your corporate applications. It runs just like Safari. It smells, feels, tastes just like Safari. The difference is it's running our agent in there and it's allowing us to infuse policy controls. When you're done with that, you want to do your private browsing or personal browsing, you go to your personal browser. We have no visibility control over that. We don't see anything. There's no big brother looking over your shoulder and trying to get intimate with your search histories and things of that nature. And so it really provides a balanced and beautifully elegant solution for addressing BYOD or third-party access, as well as managed device access too, because now I don't have to change anything within my environment. I just run with the tools that I have, and I've got this great level of visibility and control. And I know, Jeremy, from your perspective, our customers really, really appreciate that approach. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So, one of the big things that again, splitting it out to managed and unmanaged devices. On unmanaged, you don't want to get in people's way, right? When they need to access the corporate applications, they do so with the Seraphic protected instance, right? And so, let me go into that in a bit of detail. If I pull up the browser selector when I'm first installing the Seraphic workspace, it lets the end user pick their flavor of browser. So I'm most familiar with Chrome. So I click Chrome. There's a new shortcut with the company's logo over the top of it. So they know very clearly when I need to do the company's work, I go to this version of Chrome. I still have my personal one separate, right? With no big brother in there, right? No security controls. But when I need to access the corporate applications, that's when I really need the protection up for accessing the corporate applications. And I can tie in policies like force them to immediately SSO in against an IDP, right? Now, what the rest of the market is addressing that is their own browser. Their security controls aren't the best, so they've taken a different approach. They try to virtualize and isolate the memory space that those browsers run in.
Yep.
That presents a big challenge in the size, right? So most of them run about 8 gig of memory to create that virtualized memory space, very heavy-handed. And then, like you were talking about the CVEs, right? If we find a CVE in Chromium, Google and will usually tell the world, "Hey, found some new CVEs, and download the patch here." Well, that now starts the timer for these other guys. Like,
Yep.
oh, there's CVEs now. I have to address those because I have my own branch of the Chromium project, right? So then they have to go and patch theirs. So there's a gap there where everybody in the world's aware of those CVEs before those specific browser vendors can get their patch out, right? That's the danger time for them, right? We don't have that danger time, as I'll get to in just a second. There's also functionality you lose, right? If there's any type of improvements that the browser companies come out with, individually, right? Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Safari, they all have their own add-ons. You lose those if you're going with somebody else's browser, right? So again, by installing in any browser, we allow both the CVE patching as well as the feature functionality enhancements to still be there for the end user. And then moving on to the managed side, yeah, any browser, right? If you go into a managed company, that business friction is a non-starter for people. You say you have to use this browser. Go try to tell your dev team they can't use Firefox anymore and see the revolution that happens, right? I mean,
Oh my gosh.
that is not okay with them, right? But
And
like you
it's
mentioned,
I'm sorry, go ahead, go
oh,
ahead.
well, I was just going to say, like you mentioned here, that there's two big things that we do that really separate us on the market, right? Yes, we install as an extension, but we are not an extension managed solution. It's what that extension does that really separates us, right? It injects that abstraction layer. Every time a session opens, the first thing that has to happen is Seraphic gains control of it, right? So everything else that happens when the browser goes to do anything, it has to go through our detection mechanisms first, right? And then that JSLR, let's talk about that for half a second. We're randomizing how the browser uses its memory space, right? It's very similar to ASLR on the operating system, right? But what it means is you cannot run a memory-based CVE against the browser we're protecting. Doesn't matter what browser it is, right? So if Chrome comes out and says, "Hey, found 3 new CVEs, we see bad guys exploiting the code in the wild. Everybody needs to stop what you're doing and patch now." That emergency is gone for our customers. I'd never say don't patch, but patch at the next patch Tuesday, right? You don't have to stop what you're doing and address that as a critical need. We reduce the priority of those vulnerabilities inside an environment. So it's another very big differentiator for us on the market.
And that is huge, and that goes into the heart of what it is that we're talking about as well. And it's funny that how creatures of habit we become. And when I am at my most productive, it's with things that I know and I'm comfortable with, I'm familiar with, and I can anticipate and predict. As soon as you take that away from me and throw something new at me, and I got to stumble and bumble my way through it, it's a chore, it's a hassle, and it creates a lot of pushback and animosity. And something that you'd mentioned before, I talk to not just developers, or not just to other admins, talk to just end users who have gone down a path with a particular vendor, only to say, look, it's too frustrating to be able to use. This is so embedded into that browser and into that browser space that, as I said before, it's so seamless and invisible to the end user that we can then infuse excuse me, the right types of controls, the right type of randomization things that really provide the necessary protections without getting in the way of the user. Now, I've been in security for a while. I know, Jeremy, you have as well. And it was always a lot of fun back in the early days when someone would come up and say, "Hey, I want to do this." And you'd fold your arms and go, "Nope, can't do that." Why? Because that's not policy. We don't do that anymore. You want to do something, you got to write a report, you got to give me this, submit this stuff, we got to reroute all this stuff. No, it's impossible to do. Well, nowadays, with our
Mhm.
phones and with our home offices, we're our own IT departments, and we like to do things the way we like to do things. And it's hard sometimes for IT to say no to things that are going to be helpful and productive for our user community. And if we put too many restrictions in their way, they bypass it anyway, and we're right back to square one. Here is a brilliant way of avoiding that. Again, that no compromise approach to delivering the right types of security controls, enterprise grade controls embedded into the browser that do not get in the way of our user community. They don't even know it's there. And because it's so intimate with the browser now, we have this amazing opportunity to really start doing the things that our adversaries have been exploiting for a while. And that is what we've been here to talk about. And that's encrypting session tokens. With that level of intimacy that we have with the browser now, we see where the storage areas are. We see what the session tokens look like. We can do things with that. And Jeremy, this is more your domain here. I'm going to let you kind of speak to this slide because this is really kind of the bread and butter of what really makes us a very unique and differentiated solution.
Yeah, yeah. So, there's policies you can control who can log into what, right? But what happens when I log into them and I do get a MFA challenge, I accept that and I get that session token, right? We talked about this earlier. It's stored in the normal session token storage, session storage inside the browser. But bad guys have found a way around that, right? So Seraphic, because of that abstraction layer, that session agent, right, we're able to manipulate the data in a way that they're not expecting, right? We're able to use a 256-bit encryption key to encrypt both the cookies, the local storage, the session storage, and the index DB from the browser, right? And that it's interesting storage method, right? Using the OS credential vault, the profile storage, right? They live inside an encrypted database as well, right? We're encrypting all of the interesting areas that the bad guys might go after. But that's great. Now it's encrypted. So how do I get access to it? Right. And that's what really is an interesting and unique approach. And again, keeps the bad guys from being able to reach in and grab it or spoof, right? That there's somebody and grab it on the fly is another thing you could do with an extension, a malicious extension. I can watch the token get passed to it, right? But the key for our just-in-time decryption is it's in sandbox renderer process, right? So we will only decrypt and expose the data to the application, the proper application that's requesting it. So it can't just be anybody, right? We validate that it is the correct application accessing that session token, right? And then again, it's released through that sandbox renderer process. So it's in a sandbox environment. You can't just jump into that encrypted sandbox environment, right? So those decrypted values stay in memory based on the page's origin, right? And they're wiped if that session ever goes away, right? Whether it's browser closed or the tab suspended or you kill the session manually, right? That information is no longer kept in any memory at all, right? Again, it would require another proper origin request to be able to spin up another sandbox to again present that information, right? So that ensures that there's no way in through it, right? There's the bad guys don't have the ability to know how to trick us into it, right? There is no good way unless I'm putting my hacker hat on here. If you would have to be on the server side in order to see anything like that, right? I mean, there's no good way to be able to do that,
Right.
right? So it's just up leveling the way that they're able to keep the bad guys from seeing the information, which means there's no way to catch it on the fly. And again, if you try to reach inside the browser, whether from a malicious script from a bad page or an extension, malicious extension running in there, maybe a good one that's gone bad, we can talk about that later, or from the operating system reaching in through a CVE to grab it. It won't matter. All they're going to get is encrypted junk. Right? We mentioned the Okta hack earlier, right? If you would send up a HAR file to their Okta Zendesk, that still would have had that session token. It would have been worthless to them.
Right.
Right? They would not have been able to decrypt that encrypted token to be able to reuse it. Right? And it's
Now I got to
a
put you on the
unique
spot
and
here.
novel
Just
method.
Yep, I got to put you on the spot here just a second. This sounds It sounds like it's the right approach, but it also sounds rather complicated. Is there a performance hit? Do users see and experience a performance hit with this? It sounds like it'd be something like you would expect in kind of a RBI scenario where you can send all this stuff off and it's going to render in some sandbox in the cloud. And it's going to do all this fun stuff. And typically when it does that, you get a nice little latency hit. How is the user experience with regards to us being able to do this?
Yeah. So we put my nerd hat on again. Well, you asked two different questions there. You asked, is there a performance hit? And does the end user, what's the end user experience? So technically speaking, there is a performance hit, but it's measured in milliseconds. So the real question, the more important question is, does that change the end user experience? And the answer is no. right? It's faster than they can blink their eye. They're not aware of it at all, right? It's completely invisible to them, right? They just know that they browsed to the website and it let them in without authenticating because they authenticated a half an hour before, right? So there is no change in the end user experience or behavior, right? With this one specifically, you can force end user behavior change through our governance policies, different story. But for these session tokens, no, there is no felt impact whatsoever. The end user won't know it's even happening. Like,
So, so if I'm hearing you correctly, we're closing a massive gap in our posture, and we're doing so without any noticeable or any discernible user impact whatsoever, and not forcing the users to have to sit and wait and go get a cup of coffee or build a sandwich or do something else like you normally do when you try and log in the morning to your systems.
yeah,
We're doing this without forcing or creating any type of friction with the users. Yes?
that's right. No business impact to them whatsoever, right? It's
That
a
is, yeah, it's a
dramatically different way to apply it to. And you know, we could talk about, there's good ways to prevent attacks, and of course we have tons of them. It's amazing what you can do based on the context of being a session agent, not just an extension,
yep.
right? But this is the what if, right? That's what this encrypting session tokens addresses. That, well, what if they find a new way, right? Well, what if they find a way around this control? What if they find a way around that control? Right? The answer is who cares?
They're not
All
going to
they
get
get is
anything.
encrypted junk. Yeah,
Yeah, they get
yeah,
gobbledygook. It's meaningless to them, and they're going to
yeah. This
move
is
on,
the
going
encrypted
somewhere else.
backstop. Yep.
Yep, fantastic. And that when it was introduced to me in this fashion, that really piqued my interest. And the more I've been diving into it and talking to different customers about this is a phenomenal bit of protection for them that maybe with this type of webinar and in some other sessions we're starting to shine some light on it, a really key gap in our postures, but we can easily overcome that gap and really start to put in place, as I keep saying, the right types of tools that get us the right types of outcome and the right type of input or output from our user community. This to me is really the holy grail of browser security. Is no matter what's going on in the browser, I have CVEs, I can't get around and patch them. I don't have to worry about it because no matter what someone could get into, whether it is a Chrome or Edge or Safari or whatnot, there's really nothing in there that they can see from the sessions. They cannot grab these things. They cannot masquerade as my users. I'd sleep much better at night knowing that this is in my arsenal.
Yeah, there's another interesting use case for this too. With, you can actually, by expiring the policy for a specific user, you can ensure that they can no longer reuse that token as well. So I don't just have to do it on an identity level and revoke their access, right? We can actually expire the Seraphic agent or kill the policy, and they won't be able to reuse the token that exists inside there too. So again, now it's just encrypted junk that can't be decrypted, right? So that's
And
another
that's yeah.
interesting authentication and access use case that is just the nature of the way the policy works, not of any planned expiring thing too. So
And as we talk about defense in depth, I mean that's the ultimate right there. We're starting to be able to get to a bunch of different scenarios that truly address the what ifs as it pertains to what's going on in the browser. Very unique, and I hope you guys can appreciate. I get excited when we start talking about this and having opportunities to talk with customers who are deploying this and seeing this in real life, and we're solving these real problems, and their users are just completely unaware that there's anything going on in the background. That is a really unique solution. It's a very unique opportunity, and hopefully something that is so valuable to what we're dealing with right now. And as it pertains to, kind of where this technology can take us, as we started talking about and started scratching the surface on, yeah, with that level of intimacy in the browser, we can do and enforce really strong, safe browsing policies and prevention capabilities. And we can start expanding that because, again, we have that level of intimacy. We are gathering that context about what's going on within that browser, within that user session, within those forms and those fields in that particular site. We can enforce now stricter and more tuned governance policies based on users, based on the device posture, based on all the different attributes that we can start to then pull into and understand. And using those attributes and using a lot of that context, we can then start to enforce the right types of policies. So no matter where you are in your zero trust journey, here's a great way to start thinking about and eventually infusing zero trust controls now to that last bastion of open exposure, which is that browser. And literally, you can start now turning pretty much any browser into a pretty sophisticated threat prevention platform that can help you really get a handle on where the core challenges are and where the core landmines are, if you will, out in the wild that our adversaries have been so handily exploiting. And I know, again, we touched upon this a little bit, Jeremy, too. Our customers really start off in that safe browsing, bucket, but are starting to really see the value of having that abstraction layer now within the JavaScript agent to be able to do additional use cases. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest growing use case that we have now is actually extension management, right? So again, a lot of people out there have ways to address this, right? You can enumerate what extensions are there, and I can even compare that to a known bad list. That's a great first level. If you don't have anything, that's a great first level, right? But we've been able to take that beyond that, right? So now with extensions on a managed device, we install in all of the browsers, not just one, right? We'll go and if I have 4 browsers on my device, it's going to be on all 4. So I'll tell you what extensions are running across all 4, right? And then we provide both a security risk score and a privacy risk score. We enumerate all the permissions that they all have. We show you all the content scripts they run, right? If they're using OAuth 2 scopes, we'll show that information, external communications, right? And this is done with an LLM analysis. So I don't have to figure out why the security risk is high on this one, right? I don't have to figure out what vulnerabilities of the JavaScript libraries that this extension has are bringing into my environment, right? All of that information is done for you. That's hours of work by an analyst saved. And we do it all on the back end. And very importantly, for every version that comes out, right? So every time that extension is updated, there's a new analysis performed, right? And that we see that risk changes dramatically from version to version. And you would think that the extension vendors would get better, right? So the risk would be going down. That is not the case either. It's all over the map, right? Some updates will be incredibly risky because they have 150 vulnerabilities in the JavaScript libraries that they're using, right? So anyway, that dynamic change makes it very hard for enterprise organizations to be able to understand today what risk those extensions are bringing into the environment. And then, of course, with our policies, we can act as a control point for them. So we can say, I don't want any extensions of this category, or we can even do, here are the extensions that are allowed, everything else is blocked, or we can be dynamic. And based on the criticality score, I can say low and medium risk are allowed, but high and critical are blocked. And if the extension ever moves into higher critical, it will automatically disable the extension across the environment. That one's definitely driving a lot of business. And then, it's hard to overstate the importance of preventing zero and unpatched end day attacks, right? If you cannot run exploit code against the CVE in a browser with us running in there, that's a bold
Yeah.
claim. We've had it verified twice, 2 years ago, and then just in December, right? And same situation, both times, different companies, but they weren't able to get a single bit of that exploit code run against those CVEs. So those two are definitely a bigger one. And then of course, legacy VPN is dying, right? The ZTNA is the right approach, and
Yeah.
even for remote management, right? I can use my browser to SSH into infrastructure on a private network, right?
And that's
RDP,
That's
kubectl,
key.
anything.
Yeah, exactly. Because VPN's still around just to get you back to some of those legacy applications, which are rapidly changing and evolving into more web-based front ends anyway. So there's really very little opportunity, if you will, to continue to have to support this very expensive kind of, very latency sensitive kind of infrastructure, transition into more of a browser centric approach, and you can still get the same kind of controls as ETNA type of controls without all the infrastructure overhead and management headache as managing VDI or VPNs and things of that nature. And we've seen customers, countless customers, talk about that as well. The ability to just turn off some of this infrastructure that it serviced a legacy thing before. Why do you still have it? Well, because we have it because we still have it. Here's a great opportunity to go in and take a look at, how do we modernize and how do we streamline some of the processes and streamline our infrastructure to better accommodate where our users are and what they're doing. There's great tools here, and you do not lose control. You don't lose visibility. And I think that's one of the key things that Seraphic really does better than just about anybody else out there in the industry. And when you think about it as well, as we start talking about kind of where our approach is, we've hit on this enough, and it's really worth emphasizing again. We have looked at this really holistically. We didn't view the world from a lens of managed, unmanaged, or this browser, that browser, anything like that. We just really tried to solve a very elegant problem in a very elegant way, and that is, how do we bring the right controls down to where people are interacting with applications and data right now. And it made sense to do it in the way that we did it, the JSLR agent that can be inserted or injected, if you will, into any browser, whether that is your browser that's sitting on your desktop and a managed device that's already controlled by the enterprise. Boom, insert it into those browsers there, to Jeremy's point, in all the browsers. And we'll continue to make sure that we assess what they're doing and give you good controls over that sort of thing. But if you have BYO and you have contractors or third parties coming in and out of your network, and they need access to these different applications, what's their flavor of browser this week? What do they prefer to use? What is their productivity preference? Boom, here's a wrapped browser that's got the right logo, so it's easily identifiable as which is my personal versus which is my corporate. And I can do the same controls, or I have the same experience, I have the same outputs, that allows us to really focus on driving the right outputs. Robust security, zero friction, flexible, so flexible in terms of deployments. I don't have to balance between, well, these unmanaged devices are going to get this thing, and my managed devices are going to get a completely different thing, and I got to have multiple different screens to try and figure out what's going on. Nope, got a very consistent set of outputs because of the flexibility in our deployment. Seamless user experiences I keep talking about before, and in all the use cases we were talking about, irrespective of how you deploy us. That is how you really make any browser secure, and that's a very unique way that Seraphic has been coming to market. And I imagine, Jeremy, from your perspective, that's resonating really well with our customers as well, correct?
Absolutely. Of course, the business friction in managed devices, thou shalt use my browser, as I like to call it's just a non-starter, right? But the policy challenges are separate too, right? It is mostly focused on security, extension control, right? On a managed device. But on a BYOD device, the data component becomes more important, right? If I'm accessing a sensitive data application and I do a copy in the browser, that's a data loss event. That
Yep.
data has moved from the browser to my clipboard, which is an operating system function that is now beyond my ability to recover, right? So we have policies like that will encrypt that information. So when I do a copy command, we'll encrypt the data before it leaves the browser, so what lands on their clipboard is encrypted. If they tried to paste that into a Word document, it's gobbledygook, right? But if I paste it back into the session, we'll decrypt that information coming back in. So we can still allow the copy paste functionality without losing control of the data. We can do the same thing with documents. If you download a Word document, we'll encrypt it. So what hits the operating system is an encrypted .seraphic file that's worthless to anything but a Seraphic protected browser. You open it in the browser and it decrypts the document, and now they're able to edit and do all their daily work inside a browsing tab, right? So we can kind of force control of the data so that it never leaves your control, even on an unmanaged device, right? That who knows what the security is on that operating system, right? They could be ate up with malware, right? But again, by the isolation, the abstraction layer, the JSLR that we do, you can't run it through a CVE to be able to reach inside the browser with whatever malware is running on there. And we can consider posture, and that actually makes an important difference on BYOD and managed devices, right? So I can consider, do you have an endpoint protection running? If
Yep.
it's a managed device and you have my CrowdStrike, I'll integrate with it. What's my zero trust assessment score? All of that's available for policy decisions.
And when it comes to policy decisions and ecosystems and that sort of thing, we do support your current stack, whatever it is that you're running. We can integrate into it. We've got APIs, we've got integration guides, all sorts of stuff. But really, we're filling a very interesting gap that a lot of pretty much everyone out in the industry really hasn't been focused on, and we're doing it in a very unique way. Really, the only solution that can satisfy how do extensions work, how do dedicated browsers work, and how do you do this in a policy driven way that's uniform across all the different deployment landscapes. And I know we're just at time now. I wanted to be able to open up for a couple of questions. We've, I think, hit at this ad nauseum. There's really a very unique way that we've approached browser security, and I think this is browser security done right, and really feel that the way that we're focused on adding this abstraction layer gives us unprecedented visibility, unprecedented control, and gives you the right types of output that you need. So with that, a little time here. I appreciate everyone sticking with us. We've been a little long-winded, but there's a lot of information to cover, and hopefully you've been finding this information valuable. Want to open it up for one or two questions here. I know we've only got about a minute or so left. First question comes in, and this is from Donovan. He says, does JSLR interact with Chromium directly for our BYOD?
Yeah, so it would in this case, and not from their personal browsers, but only from their Seraphic protected browser. So on BYOD, they run an executable, lets them pick their flavor. They pick Chrome. It puts a new Chrome shortcut, not their personal access. That's still left alone. But the new one, yes, the JavaScript layout randomization still exists there. So that instance would be protected against it, not their personal instance, though, because we're not interfering with that. Good
Fantastic.
question.
Donovan also has a follow-up. Does this protect against a man in the middle? Because would they see the real values that are being sent to the server, like a proxy based attack?
That's an outstanding question. The answer is no, it does not, because that would be decrypted on the fly. However, we do extremely well at man in the middle because we can identify it as a phishing instance, right? So the way our phishing models work real quickly, we model what loads and how it loads, 200 different risk flags. They all have a different weight. As they're tripped, when we get beyond that, we'll prevent interaction with the web page. That works all of the time. We shouldn't see any of those because your proof point and abnormal should be catching those.
Yep.
We see them every day because they continue to get by those phishing things. I'll never say replace them, but we work as a great backstop, and that's exactly how we address the adversary in the middle type of threat.
Fantastic. We have a question, and we'll do one or two more here. Appreciate everyone staying with us. Apologies, we go a little bit over, but again, hopefully this is valuable information for you. Divine asks, hi, some customers argue that they have web isolation tools to take care of this sort of browser challenges, these sort of browser challenges. How does Seraphic position itself against browser isolation capabilities or browser isolation solutions?
Yeah, so browser isolation has been up until enterprise browsers the best way to go about doing it. It has been, right? I can let a threat execute and detonate on an isolated environment. And for that reason, it is still a good idea. We have other ways to solve it. So that's not the only way. But what we do very well, browser isolation doesn't stop against phishing, right? I'm still going to open up that web page and enter in my credentials. It's still going to hit me with an MFA and I'm still going to accept it, right? And that is now in an unprotected environment, right? They can reach in and grab that information. So it depends on the situation. There's definite overlap with the way we're doing things, but I'm not enumerating. I'm not able to control what extensions are running in my browser and provide the detailed level of risk associated with those and govern those interactions as effectively as the new enterprise browser security market can. There's also
Perfect.
performance impact that
Yep.
we usually see with RBI. That's
I
another
was going to
big
mention
one
that,
that you don't get with us. Yeah.
which is why RBI really kind of it rolled out and installed because it
Yeah.
was for more of the power users, people who could tolerate a lot of latency. Most people kind of push back on the latency aspect of having to run to some kind of sandbox in the sky or in the cloud, wait for it to render everything, send information back. It just became a very difficult environment to work in. So that's another
Yeah,
thing that
that
we
we
work on.
joke good enough for government work, right? That
Sure.
that is the space that's adopted it the most is government for sure.
Perfect. And last question. This is a good one. This comes in from Ramesh. He asks, do passkeys and passwordless solutions address stolen session token problems?
So it would depend on how they're presenting it, but the short answer would be no. You're still presenting. It's basically you're using a token to get a token. And so that's good in that I don't have to remember passwords, skim,
Yep.
rotate things very quickly, things like that. But the end response is a token, right? I'm still going to get a session token that I can use to authenticate. And then again, through the methods that we've discussed, the
I
bad
was going to
guys can
say,
reach in and grab it
where
when it
does that
doesn't need it.
session token end up? It ends up in the
Yeah.
storage where bad guys are going after. So it really, it's a good way, to your point, to alleviate weak passwords and having to enter fields and forms and that sort of thing. But it is the token, it is the valuable thing that's going to end up in the storage that our adversaries have access to. So it really doesn't alleviate this challenge that we've addressed. But with what we can do, we certainly can support passwordless environments, and we can support tokens and things of that nature. We'll do the same encryption. It doesn't matter to us, so that you have the same output irrespective of what type of authentication mechanism you're going after.
Sounds like that's a better together story. Right.
Absolutely, 100%. Alrighty, folks. I know we've gone a few minutes over. Really do appreciate your time and attention here. I hope this information was valuable to you. On behalf of everyone here, thank you so much for joining us. There will be a recording of this session, and we'll follow up with you guys afterwards. Those of you who we weren't able to address your questions, we'll follow up as well after the webinar. Encourage you guys to reach out to Jeremy and myself, or any one of us here at Seraphic with any other questions that you have. We'd love to engage in further conversations. And look forward to speaking with you on a future webinar. With that, everyone, have a great day. Thanks again.
Thanks.